Hey everyone, and welcome back to New York Wedding Jam, the podcast for modern couples. I'm your host, Martine Dardniak, and I am with my co-host here, Jason Alicia. Jason, how's it going?
I'm doing very well, Martine. How are you?
I am okay. I am recovering from a wedding. I don't know if you get the wedding hangover thing happening. And this is not about alcohol for everybody who's curious. I'm
I
not. That's not
didn't
a
know
thing.
you partake in your wedding spirits.
I don't. But wedding day typically looks like for me is I run out of here to get to the venue on time. I've probably been troubleshooting at least two or three issues before I've left home. To ensure that everything is running smoothly. So normally my day starts about 6 a.m. and I'm going to whatever time the wedding is going to at the end of the day. So depending on what's going on in the day, it means I probably didn't eat and I'm going to be walking upstairs. I once did a Fitbit thing where I tracked it one time, only once because it was a little distressing afterwards, and I climbed something like 30 floors that day and walked something like 25,000 steps, and I was just like, nah, I don't really need to know this anymore.
It's like the
So
Empire State Building. It's like,
this is happening real time, right? So usually the day after a wedding, I like to it's just a recovery day, and so there's a lot of self-care happening that involves drinking lots of water and getting some sleep, and hopefully a massage in there, or at the very least a Epsom salt bath. But yes, I'm in the middle of recovery mode right now, and I'm okay. I'm okay right now. It's good. It's much better.
okay. Yeah, I don't really experience it that much, but I know my job is different than yours. I hear that you're taking a lot of steps. The videographer's job is a little bit more physical. I'm carrying a lot of gear
Right.
into the job and out of the venue. I'm also carrying a lot of stuff with me during the day. But I'm okay when I leave for the most part, I think. And even the next day, there's like pressure to get some content out. There's pressure to upload and back up all of my things. So I know your job is mostly done after the wedding day, and my job is kind of still going and is going to continue to go for another couple of months. Just with the technical side, the editing and that kind of stuff. But I don't ever get the hangover thing, so thankfully.
I mean, it's so interesting, to me, and I guess everybody's a little bit different, but I mean, it's usually a good 12 hours on my feet, right? So
Yeah.
by the time I've run around and done all the things and answered all the questions, I probably forgot to eat. And that actually brings us to the topic of this episode was please feed your
Right.
vendors,
Yes.
and the importance of it. And I do my couples are lovely, and so this is not about my people. I just want to make this very very clear. Not even remotely about my folks. In fact, they're usually the ones who are like, Martine, sit down. You have to eat something. And I have literally had people try and shove a plate in my face. And so it's not about my people. They are kind and loving humans, but I have heard from some other folks that the feeding the vendors thing gets a little interesting, and I there are some reasons for it and some things I just want people to be aware of in terms of costing and timing and why it's important and what that really means. That I wanted to get into a little bit today. What you think?
Yes, I think it's an important thing to talk about, especially as couples probably are not expecting this or may not understand that this is also part of. It's going to be part of your budget, right? So
Right.
you need to think about cost. We'll talk about that in a second. We're also going to talk about timing, like when they eat, because that is crucial as someone who is particularly interested in capturing your first dance and your speeches and your cake and all of those other formalities. Timing when we eat is a big thing, and also
Right.
location. So we're going to talk about price, location, and timing. So let's start with price.
Yeah, so a lot of times what people don't realize is that vendors have to eat, and that will be included in the fees that you have to pay to your caterer or to the venue if they're doing the catering at the end. And you may not have accounted for that in the beginning because nobody included it, right? It wasn't an included part of your costs and just the number wise. But usually when the catering team comes to you for a final head count, they will ask about the vendor count at that point. You probably, I mean, they probably gave you a price for like how much the vendors were to feed. And it's usually like, I don't know, half price off, or even sometimes even a little bit less for like the main dish for your vendors to eat. A lot of times they'll do it like same price as they do with children or something like that. But it is sometimes a surprise addition to folks, especially if you didn't know exactly how many vendors were coming. And so then you have to do a head count of number of vendors and add that to a bill. And again, at this point, you've spent all the money already, right? Like, and so you don't want any surprises at the end. So just important to take note of that. I think it may seem like I've heard this complaint before, again, not from my people, but just online and in general, that, well, I've already paid them for a service, like why should I also have to pay for them to eat? Which is fine, right? In most workplaces, most people will be able to go outside and go grab their lunch, or I can bring my lunch and, you know, store it in a refrigerator, but that's not an option for wedding vendors, right? If we have to leave to go eat, that means that we're not doing the job you've hired us to do. Right. And there is no place for us to leave food if we're expected to actually like do our job, right? Like I can't just bring my lunch to the kitchen, right? It's not my kitchen, and it's not an employee kitchen for us to do so. So that's something. And for legal reasons, a lot of times outside food is not allowed in those kitchens, right? And so it's a liability issue that kind of has to be factored into what's happening. And, you know, as I said before, like, you know, this is usually like a 10 to 12 hour day for most of us, right? And so we have to eat at some point. And, you know, unless you want your vendors like passing out, it's just one of those extra costs that you're just going to have to factor into the finality of it all.
I have a question for you, Martine.
Yes.
So I guess you can only speak about your weddings. How many vendors would you say, in your experience, does a couple have to feed?
I mean, it depends, right?
What's your average, your ballpark?
So 5 to 7 is probably about average. If you've got a band, it's going to be more than that, right? Like, so if you've got to feed all the band members, depending on the size of the band that is there. And the more vendors you have, the more vendors you're going to have to feed, right? But the DJ is usually like 2 or 3 folks. Photo team might be 2 or 3 people. The video team might be another 2 or 3 people, depending on, again, what you've paid for. The planning team is going to be a couple of people, at least. And so it just kind of depends on how many vendors you have, what that looks like. But I would say about 5 to 7 is average, for what that looks like. And, you know, 5 to 7 people, and depending on like what the costs were that you've associated, you know, you're definitely spending a few $100s at least to feed the entire team, no matter what you do. So it is a few $100s that you're going to have to add in addition to whatever you were planning on, for sure, depending on, again, how much your venue is or the caterer is charging for food. You know, maybe it's more than that even, right? So, sure. But it depends, but definitely it can be at least I wouldn't say significant, but it's a decent chunk of change for additional food at the end of everything that you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, in your quick calculation, you figured you just counted 12 people in your photo, video, DJ, and planner team.
Right.
That's 12. You just named 12 people. So right. So like, you know, it's important. It's important. As a vendor, I can tell you, if you're listening, it's certainly appreciated. As someone who normally, I'll give you like an example of my day, from 12 noon to 9 p.m. might be like an example of a shift that I work, or my timeline. And I'm having breakfast. I'm showing up around midday. Maybe I'm getting there early, around 11:30, 11. I'm not having lunch. And so the
Mm-hmm.
next time I'm eating is really about, 8 o'clock at night or something like that, 7 o'clock at night. So I am bringing snacks for me during the day to kind of, and water to kind of keep me going. But certainly as the night wears on, it definitely gets tougher and tougher. So a meal is certainly appreciated.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I don't think most people are factoring in. I usually I try to eat breakfast before I leave. So depending on what time the wedding starts, I will certainly try to make sure that I am fed before I arrive. But
Right.
sometimes that's just not a possibility, right? Depending on where and when and how I've got to be there. Like I may have missed it, which means that again, the next time I'm eating, Jason, is the same time that all the other vendors are eating at 7 o'clock, and at which point I've already probably been there for about 10 hours. So it definitely does make a difference to all of us as we are here, and it is appreciated, the thoughtfulness that comes into it. We know it's an additional thing, and it may seem like an easy one for some folks. Now again, granted, a lot of times, like I said, with my couples, and I can only talk about my people, but with my couples, half the time they're like, my mother would kill me, right? Like if I wasn't planning on feeding all the people that are here today, right?
Right.
So it's nothing specific. It's just like more chatter that I've heard, and something to be accounted for and thought about at the beginning rather than at the end, so it doesn't come as a shock from
Right.
a sticker price perspective.
Now let's talk about the location. We talked about some of the prices, the fact that you're going to have to feed between 7 and 12, possibly more people on that night. Now, where are they all eating? Do they sit with with the guests? Do they sit at the sweetheart table and eat with the bride and groom? I would love that. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, that'd be fun. I think, most of us really don't mind where we're sitting as long as we're getting fed. It doesn't really matter. Depending on the venue, I've had venues have specific locations where the vendors have to go eat. I've had venues that are okay with a vendor table in the ballroom. If you can get a vendor table in the ballroom, I find that easiest because we can be around all the action. And again, this is not like we're sitting down for an hour long like break, right? This is like 15 minutes of shoveling food down your face, right, so that you can get back to work. If we're lucky on a good night, it's 20 minutes, right? But usually it's not an extended amount of time. If you can get it in the ballroom, if that makes sense, if you have space for it on your floor plan, it makes it easier because then we can be part of the action. Definitely not in the front, and definitely not back corner somewhere is fine,
Hey,
right? Like
nobody puts baby in the corner. Nobody puts baby in the corner.
we're okay. We're okay being behind a curtain, like whatever makes your life easier in terms of positioning. But some venues also just don't allow it for that, or again, you might not have space for it. But a table where people can have a hot meal is definitely appreciated and should be thought about and discussed with the venue so that everybody's on the same page about where and when that's going to happen. And I think that's the last part that we want to talk about is the actual timing of this, and when it's appropriate to feed your vendors during the evening.
Yeah. This is especially important to me, but just with regard to location, my experience has been, and I'm thinking about the majority of my weddings, many of them have been like, so wherever the reception space is,
Yeah.
the vendors will eat in what was previously
The cocktail hour space.
cocktail hour space,
Yeah.
or just like in a space just adjacent to
Right.
the reception room, wherever
Right.
that is. So,
Right.
it's close by, and we're not seen. I've had a couple one time tell me, we love you, Jason, but we want you to not be seen when you're eating. And I've had a couple tell me that, and I should normally be offended, but I wasn't offended for some reason. I was like, I get it. I'm the help. Even though we have a nice relationship, but yeah, I'm happy to kind of, and also for me, I have to say, like, it's nice to take a break out of that room,
Right. Right.
and just to kind of step away from the level of sound and just the ambiance, and just kind of just have a few, like you said, it's only 15-20 minutes of quiet, just for a few minutes, just to eat and maybe post a social media thing from my phone, but yeah, it's usually in a different location. For me, I've usually been in a different location than the reception space.
And I would say, like, in my case, it's like 50-50, right? Like, sometimes it's in the room, sometimes it's right outside, sometimes it's in a whole other room. So it depends on the venue, like I said, and what their setup is. A lot of times it is in the cocktail hour space, so wherever that happened to be, and usually that's pretty close by to the reception area, but it's not always, right? So it just kind of depends. I guess my advocate, like, I'm advocating for, it doesn't matter. And sometimes some vendors really do, like you, Jason, like some vendors are kind of like, I don't want to be in the ballroom, right? Like I would prefer not to do that, and I will take my meal elsewhere just so that I can actually get a legit break for right now. It doesn't matter as long as it's kind of near enough to the action that if you need us, you can come grab us for something.
Now,
like,
listen,
that's
I
cool
am
too.
not going to name the venue because on this show, I think we've kind of like agreed informally. I don't even remember talking about this, but not going to name names. But
Right.
there is a venue that I actually really enjoy working at that does not have a dedicated location or even seating for vendor meals. So there have been times where, and I like working at this place, where I am standing up. And you know how hard it is to cut meat while you're standing up?
Yeah.
A steak
Yeah.
or any kind of fish that needs two hands to eat.
Yeah.
It's hard. And I'm eating a meal standing up in the presence of guests who are seated. It's an awkward thing. I wish they had a space. They don't have a space.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's important. And again, even if it's not in the reception room, what's wrong with the cocktail tables and the cocktail hour space for us to go eat there? Because the guests shouldn't be there at that point, right?
Right.
So, and if you don't have a dedicated room, that's okay, but you definitely have another space, and there should be at least chairs and a table. I'm not asking for any more than that. Like, chairs and a table so that people can eat real quick and get back to work.
I remember like eating kind of there was like a little cocktail table in the reception space, and I remember kind of like trying to get some space on that little table, and I'm like having a conversation with a random guest who's at the bar, which I didn't mind having. Like, the guest was really cool.
That's
and we
hard,
wound up
though.
talking about our backgrounds and what was going on, and talking about the couple. So, but I would have rather kind of had a little, 20 minutes away. So.
Right. Totally understand, Jason. Makes sense to me. I will say I did have that experience a few times myself where they didn't have, and like I was like trying to eat off my lap on a lounge couch or something. And like, it's just not ideal, I guess, is the point for feeding purposes, kind of making makeshift tables if
I was
we need
happy to get the meal, though. I have to tell you.
I was happy. Like, if I can eat, it's a better day, right? Like, so at that point, we typically need it. So definitely appreciated. And then there's the timing, and I know you're going to have your own thoughts on this one, Jason. I try as hard as I can to advocate that when the couple eats is when the vendors eat. Nobody wants to take pictures while they're eating, right? Like, nobody wants, like, I don't need this happening, right? Like, so we don't need the food stuck between our teeth. And so it's a natural break and a natural inclination for people to say, okay, we're going to pause right now because the food's coming out, we're going to eat. And it'll give your vendor team time to do it without missing anything important. So I try and advocate for that. But the thing is, ultimately, it's always down to the kitchen. So your catering team is going to dictate when the vendors eat in general. It's just more helpful if they're willing to cooperate and feed the vendors, even if it's not in the same room. I get it. Like, if we've got to go collect it someplace else, but when you guys are eating is when we're eating, so that we're not missing any action.
Nothing happens without the couple. Okay, you're not going to have speeches while the couple's eating. You're not going to have a raging dance floor while the couple's eating. You're not going to have cake cutting. There's not going to be a bouquet toss. There's not going to be any activity going on while the couple is eating. So but even the DJ, right? Maybe they'll play some soft background music while the couple and the guests are eating. Okay, so this is, if you're listening and you're working with your planner or your venue, it really is the best time to serve your vendors. Even if there's a live band that's going to provide music, I've been on weddings where there's like a 10-piece band and 5 of them will be, or 6 of them will be in the back eating, while 4 are just kind of having a low level a musical accompaniment, dinner music in the background, and then they'll eat maybe when after the other guys come back. So it really is the best time to serve your guests, because nothing is happening while that couple is eating. And and if you've been to weddings before, not you, Martine, I'm talking to the audience. If you've been to weddings before, you know that while the couple is eating, everybody and their mother and their cousin and their grandmother want to come up and kiss and hug and say hello and share a nice thought or a congratulation. I remember when I got married, we could not finish our meal because people kept coming up, and I was a little annoyed. I mean, they were my family and my wife's family. You can't be mad at people for loving you and wanting a piece of you that day. I get it.
Right.
But I was like, can I please eat? I don't want to talk with my mouth full. I'm trying to enjoy this meal. We paid for this meal. Let me enjoy it.
You paid a lot for it, probably.
Yeah,
too.
Every 2 seconds, somebody coming up, hugging. I'm kissing them with mustard on my face or spaghetti sauce or whatever we had that night. So it takes a while for the couple to eat. So there should be more than enough time to give vendors, 20, 25 minutes to put a steak down.
Right. I will tell you that oftentimes, a lot of time for me, like, I actually have to make the couples eat at some point, right? Like, like we like, hello friends and family, your meal is also being served. Like, please come back in 10. You know what I mean? Like, so that your food doesn't also get cold. It does, but people are going to want to say hello, and that obviously they're here for you. They want the opportunity to say their hellos and get their hug and a kiss and probably a picture, right? But if we let the couples eat, on their time, and we let the vendors eat at the same time, we can get back to all the action much, much quicker, so that the couples have plenty of time to then come around and say hi to everybody.
Yes. So what's the alternative?
Well.
What's the alternative, Martine? What happens when we are not allowed to eat or are not served? Forget about allowed or who's in control, but for whatever reason, it doesn't happen when the couple's eating. We don't eat when the couple eats.
Yeah,
what happens?
So what typically happens is that there's just this big lull in activity while the vendors eat, right? So if the vendors are kind of left to last after all the guests have been fed, the vendors still have to take that 15 minutes, right, to eat, which means everybody else is just sitting around for 15 minutes with nothing happening.
Yes.
And
I will take a shot at some vendors that I've planners that I've worked with, where I will go sit down and things are running behind and the venue didn't serve us when the couple was eating or the guests were eating, and I sit down and I'm like a third into my meal, and okay, so let's give a time. I'm 5 minutes, 7 minutes into a meal.
Yeah.
And the planner or coordinator or the venue coordinator will come out. Guys, they're getting ready to do speeches, and I know that this is an issue with DJs as well. And I'm not blaming the DJs or the planner, but I'm saying obviously someone didn't inform everyone that that the photographers and videographers are still eating, or we just sat down. And so I think it happened early on in my career, and now I bring my camera to dinner. I normally would put it on a tripod or set it aside. Now I bring it with me. I hang it around my waist or put it on a chair next to me, and I am almost waiting for someone to be like, "Oh, guys, they're about to start the speeches." About to start the speeches? Like, that's the most important part of the night for me, or one of the most. And so I'm scrambling when I should have had like another 10 minutes, call that a 17-minute dinner to eat, go out, set up my gear, get ready for the toast to be happening at whatever time. So it's been a challenge sometimes when we don't eat when the couple and or the guests are eating.
And that's what I try to avoid, Jason. And so again, I definitely make sure that for my teams and my purposes, because listen, as the planner, truthfully, at that part of the night, I'm mostly done, right?
Right.
By the time dinner is out, I've gotten them married, I've gotten, most of the formalities out of the way. And when I'm sitting down, the evening is just getting started for a lot of other people, but it's really towards the end of my formal responsibilities. And like I would be okay if I was the last to eat, but for everybody else, right? For the photo and video teams, for the band or the DJ, right? Like for any other vendor that's there at that point, it's the most optimal time so that we're not creating this unnecessary extra lull while people are waiting for the vendors to eat. And I do think it's an important thing for the team to get fed, right? To that we can be at our best. We don't want hangry people. And
No.
we definitely don't want people passing out or fainting because they didn't get a chance to eat at all during their 10 to 12 hour day, right? And so I do think it's super super important that it at least gets factored in and people have that conversation and understanding the why of it, right? These are people that, again, at this point, we've spent a lot of time with you. We've got your best interest at heart. It's really just about making sure that it's the most efficient flow. If we eat when you eat, life is easier.
Yeah. I personally, I'm a person who, if I don't eat for a long time, it's not that big a deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm lucky, because I've seen other people, forget about hangry and a bad attitude, but I have seen other vendors literally get weak and are not
Right.
able to move as well. They begin to literally slow down in
Right.
how they move about the space.
Right.
So I know my wife, I tried, integrating my wife into my business a couple years back, and same thing. Like we ate breakfast. We weren't, and at the time, I don't think I was savvy enough to bring snacks. She had a little bit of cocktail hour, a couple of crackers and some, maybe some fruit or something like that. And we were not eating for, 6-7 hours. And my wife is someone that needs to eat semi-regularly. Probably not
Right.
the best person for a wedding to be
Yeah.
in the wedding industry, but she refused to work with me again because she just could not handle the
Oh,
like
no.
not having a full meal, not having like sitting down having a nice full meal.
Right.
So for me, it isn't that big a deal. It's important and it's respectful to feed the vendors at a decent time and timing so we can provide you services, but also the physiology is not
Right.
going to work right for many people.
Right.
They're
Right.
not going to be working at their best,
Right.
mentally and physically.
Jason, listen, honestly, it's the same for me. Like, I can go hours and hours without eating, and I'm okay. I always bring my water, because I've got to have that at least. I got to stay hydrated. But just in the end, I know that there are some people, and again, I've seen it happen, right? I've seen the vendors either passing out or near to passing out, right?
Yeah.
And that's not what you want, because then they can't get back to work, right?
Right.
So like just in terms of logically speaking, like just for your benefit, it is best if we just eat when everybody else eats.
Yeah, I hate to be dramatic, and I've only seen this once. I've seen a lead photographer, like the lead, have to go home because she was like the blood sugar, and she probably should have taken better care of herself. Like if you know that you have medical issues with needing to consume food, she probably
Right.
should have had snacks with her, candy bars or kind bars or whatever she needs, right? Fruits. She didn't have enough or whatever, and this was not a first year photographer. She was seasoned, maybe in her 7th or 8th year, and she just went down. She had to call her husband to come pick her up.
Yeah.
And the second shooter wound up being the first shooter for, I would say, 2/3 of the evening.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
It's an important one, and again, like I realize that it seems like, what's the big deal, but it can be, right? It can be a super big deal for some folks, for some vendors, for sure, and for everybody, just in general. At some point, it's just nice to please feed your vendors.
Yes. Well, Martine, this has been a lovely episode, and I'm hungry now. Actually, now that we've been talking,
I know. I should probably eat.
Yeah.
I should probably eat.
Yeah. Yeah. It's evening, and we should eat. Well, thanks so much for this episode, Martine, and we will see you guys in the next one.
All right. Take care, Jason.
Bye.